I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would cheat on her husband. After 30 years of marriage, we had built a life together, a home, a family, routines that felt as familiar as breathing. But somewhere along the way, love had turned into habit, passion into obligation. We still talked, still shared a bed, still carried the title of husband and wife, but the connection had faded into something I barely recognized. It wasn't planned. Affairs rarely are. I met him at a charity event I had volunteered for, a man with a kind smile and eyes that held something I hadn't seen in a long time: desire. At first I thought I was imagining it, that after years of feeling invisible I was simply misreading attention as attraction. But then came the casual touches, the lingering glances, the way he leaned in just a little too close when he spoke. It was intoxicating. I told myself it was harmless. A bit of flirtation, something to remind me that I was still a woman, not just a wife, not just part of an aging couple going through the motions. But when he asked me to meet him for coffee, I said yes without hesitation. One coffee turned into two, into long conversations about life, about regrets, about the versions of ourselves we used to be before routine took over. The first time it happened, I could barely look at myself in the mirror. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my wedding ring glinting under the streetlights. I told myself I had made a terrible mistake, that it could never happen again. But then came the second time, and the third, and soon I stopped making excuses. I loved my husband, I never stopped, but with this other man I felt something I hadn't in years wanted, seen. Alive. It was never about leaving, never about destroying the life I had built. It was about feeling something again, even if it was only in stolen moments.
By the way, if you're curious about what happened next, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Thank you.
But secrets have a way of unraveling, and I knew this wouldn't last forever. The guilt grew heavier with every lie, every night I spent sneaking away. And in the end, it wasn't a dramatic discovery, no confrontation or explosive revelation. It was something simpler. One night, as I climbed into bed beside my husband, he looked at me in a way he hadn't in years, as if he finally saw me again. And that was when I realized I had been looking for something I thought was gone forever, but maybe it had been here all along, waiting for me to remember it. I thought I could keep it buried, that the guilt would eventually fade, that I could tuck this secret away like an old letter in a drawer, something I'd only think about in the quiet moments when no one was watching. But guilt is funny like that. It doesn't disappear, it festers. I started noticing the way my husband looked at me differently. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then came the small hesitations, the way he lingered before responding to simple questions, the moments his eyes studied me a little too long. It was as if he could sense something was wrong, even if he didn't have the words for it yet. I tried to be normal, to act as if nothing had changed, but I had changed. When you spend so much time living in a lie, it starts to seep into everything: your words, your movements, the way you say "I love you." And he noticed. One evening as we sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. He set his fork down and just looked at me. "You've been different lately." My hands tightened around my glass. "I've just been tired. Work has been stressful." He nodded slowly, as if considering my words, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "Is there something you want to tell me?" My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Why would there be?" His gaze held mine for a long moment before he finally looked away, exhaling softly. "I don't know, I just feel like I've been losing you." I almost broke then, almost confessed everything, begged for forgiveness, told him that it had been a mistake, that I wished I could erase it all. But I didn't. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You haven't lost me." He squeezed back, and for a brief second I let myself believe that was true, that maybe I could still fix this, that maybe if I tried hard enough I could bury this secret so deep it would never surface. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and mine was already beginning to crack through the surface. The cracks became impossible to ignore. The guilt wasn't just a shadow in my mind anymore, it was slipping into my actions, my words, my very presence. My husband watched me closely, and the more I tried to act normal, the more unnatural it felt. Then it happened. The moment I had feared since the first time I crossed that line. It was a Saturday morning when I found him sitting at the kitchen table, my phone in his hand. I froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. The room felt colder, smaller. He didn't look up at me right away, just kept scrolling. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Who is he?" he finally asked, his voice eerily calm. I felt my world tilt, my mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" He lifted the phone, turned the screen toward me. Messages, not explicit but damning enough. The kind of messages that weren't meant for a married woman, the kind that unraveled everything. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but laced with something sharp, something dangerous. "I need to hear you say it." My stomach twisted. This was it. The moment I had told myself I could avoid if I was careful enough, if I played my cards right. But no amount of pretending could erase the truth now. It was sitting between us, undeniable. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because what was there to say? That I was sorry, that I didn't mean for this to happen, that I still loved him? None of it would make a difference now. The silence stretched, heavier than it had ever been. His expression didn't change, but I could see it in his eyes, the hurt, the disbelief, the slow realization that the life we had built together had been tainted in a way that could never be undone. How long, he asked, and that was when his voice broke. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. A few months. He let out a breath, shaky and uneven, then stood up so suddenly that the chair scraped against the floor. He walked past me without another word, grabbing his keys from the counter. The door slammed behind him, and just like that, he was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, my mind blank, my body numb. I had prepared for this moment in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for how it actually felt. I had spent so much time lying to him. Now, for the first time, I had nothing left to say. The house felt different after he left. Emptier, colder. I had always thought of silence as peaceful, but now it was suffocating. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, expecting a message that never came. Hours passed, then a full day, then 2. I told myself he needed time, that maybe, just maybe, he'd come back, that we could talk, find a way to fix this. But deep down, I knew better. Some betrayals don't leave room for forgiveness. On the 3rd day, I got a call from my daughter. She didn't know yet. "Mom, is everything okay? Dad's not answering his phone. He never does that." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. He just needed some space. A pause. Space from what? I couldn't tell her. Not yet, maybe not ever. Just work stress. I'm sure he'll call soon. I hated how easily the lie slipped out, but what else was I supposed to say? That her mother had betrayed the father who had given her everything? That I had torn apart a marriage that had lasted longer than she had been alive? No, I wasn't ready for that conversation. That evening, the front door opened. I turned so fast I nearly knocked over my glass. My husband stood there, his eyes hollow, his shoulders tense as if carrying the weight of something too heavy to name. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just walked past me, straight to the bedroom. I followed cautiously, my heart pounding. "Are you?" "I came for my things," he interrupted, his voice flat. "I'm staying somewhere else for now." Panic tightened in my chest. "Please, can we talk?" He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes shattered what little hope I had left. "Talk? About what? About how you lied to my face every day, about how I spent 30 years thinking I knew you, only to realize I never really did." Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't about hurting you, I lost myself. His jaw tightened. "And you found yourself in another man's bed," he shook his head. "I can't do this right now." He grabbed a suitcase from the closet, shoving clothes inside without looking at me again. I stood there, helpless, as the man I had built a life with packed his things like I was just another bad decision he was trying to leave behind. When he walked out again, he didn't slam the door this time. That almost made it worse. Because slamming a door means there's still anger, still passion, still something. This time there was only quiet resignation, and for the first time I realized I hadn't just lost him. I had lost everything. The days that followed felt like moving through a fog. I kept expecting to wake up from a bad dream, to hear his keys in the door, to see his name light up on my phone, but he stayed gone. The silence of the house stretched endlessly, filling every empty space with the weight of what I had done. My daughter called again. This time her voice was edged with something sharper, concern laced with suspicion. "Mom, I don't believe you. What's really going on?" I swallowed, gripping the phone tighter. "Your father and I just need some time apart." A long pause. "Did something happen?" I hesitated too long. She exhaled sharply. "Mom." "It's complicated," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you cheat on him?" The words cut through me like a blade. I wanted to deny it, to find another excuse, but I couldn't. My silence was its own confession. Her breath hitched. "Jesus, Mom." "It wasn't," I started, but what was the point? There was no way to soften it, no version of the truth that would make it easier to hear. "I have to go," she said quickly, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone, numb. One by one, I was losing them all. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a glass of wine, staring at the spot where my husband used to sit. The house had never felt so empty. I had been chasing a feeling, running from something I couldn't even name, and now I had nowhere left to run. Then a knock at the door. My heart lurched. For a brief, foolish second, I hoped it was him, that he had come back, that there was still a chance to fix this. But when I opened it, the man standing there wasn't my husband. It was the man who had started it all. The man who had made me feel seen, alive, wanted. "I heard," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel the rush, the excitement. All I felt was exhaustion. I shook my head slowly. "No." His brows furrowed. "Are you sure?" I let out a slow breath. I was never sure of anything, and that's the problem. He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod, stepping back. "Take care of yourself." As I closed the door, locking it this time, a strange calm settled over me. I had burned my life to the ground, chasing something I thought I wanted. And now, standing in the ruins, I realized I didn't even recognize the person who had struck the match. The weeks passed, but the silence never got any easier. My husband hadn't come back. My daughter barely spoke to me. The life I had spent 30 years building had unraveled so quickly it almost felt like it had never been real in the first place. I moved through the days in autopilot, waking up, going to work, coming home to an empty house that felt more like a tomb than a home. The man I had risked everything for never reached out again. I didn't know if I expected him to, but some small, broken part of me had thought he would. That part of me was wrong. One evening, as I walked through the grocery store, I saw my husband. He was in the next aisle, standing by the produce section, staring down at a carton of strawberries like it held the answers to the universe. He looked the same and yet different, thinner, tired, like he hadn't been sleeping, like grief had wrapped itself around him just as it had me. For a moment, I thought about turning around, leaving before he saw me, but then he looked up and our eyes met. The world shrank. I had spent weeks rehearsing this moment in my head, wondering what I would say if I ever got the chance. But standing there, I realized I had nothing. No excuse, no explanation that would make this better. He was the one who broke the silence. "How are you?" It was such a simple question, and yet I had no idea how to answer. "I don't know." He nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. I hesitated before speaking again. "And you?" "I don't know either." A small, bitter smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, and for the first time I saw something familiar in him again. Something that reminded me of the life we had before I ruined it. "Do you hate me?" I asked softly. He was quiet for a long time, then finally he shook his head. "No, I just don't know who you are anymore." The words stung more than if he had screamed at me. He didn't need to hate me. Indifference was worse, because hate meant there was still something there. Hate meant it still mattered. I wanted to say something, to ask if there was still a way back, but before I could, he glanced at his watch. "I should go." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay." He turned to leave, then paused. "Take care of yourself." I watched as he walked away, disappearing into the aisles, leaving me standing there with nothing but the echo of his words. And for the first time since it all fell apart, I truly understood. I had already lost him, and now he was finally ready to let me go. Time moved forward, whether I was ready for it or not. Days turned into weeks, then months. The house remained silent, untouched, as if frozen in the moment my husband had walked out the door. I went through the motions, work, errands, sleep, but everything felt hollow. I no longer checked my phone expecting to hear from him. I no longer thought of the man who had distracted me long enough to make the worst mistake of my life. There was nothing left to wait for. The damage had been done, and I was living in the ruins. One evening, as I was sorting through old photo albums, I found one from the early years of our marriage. We were young, smiling, arms wrapped around each other like nothing in the world could break us. I traced my fingers over the image, remembering how safe it had felt to be loved without doubt, without conditions. Somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that feeling had faded, that I needed something more. But looking at that photo, I wondered, had it faded? Or had I just stopped seeing it? I wasn't sure why I did it, but I picked up my phone and typed out a message to my husband. It was simple. "I miss you." I stared at it for a long time before pressing send, my heart pounding as if I had just crossed another irreversible line. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two, no response. I told myself I shouldn't have expected one, but the next day he called. My hands trembled as I answered, my voice barely steady. Hi. There was a pause on the other end, then his voice calm but guarded. I got your message. I swallowed hard, I meant it. Another pause. I don't know what you want me to say. I closed my eyes, trying to find the right words. I don't know either, I just needed you to know. He sighed, and for a moment I thought he was going to hang up, but instead he said, I don't hate you, I thought I did for a while, but I just don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Tears pricked at my eyes. I understand. I'm trying to move forward, he continued, his voice softer now, and I think you should too. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I will. There was a long silence, and then he finally said, take care of yourself. The line went dead. I sat there, phone still in my hand, the finality of his words settling in my chest like a weight I would carry forever. I had reached for something I thought was missing, and in the end I had lost something far more valuable. Now all I could do was live with it. Life didn't pause for grief, it kept moving, indifferent to my regret. The days stretched on, uneventful, predictable, devoid of the chaos I had once created for myself. I got up, went to work, came home, ate alone. The silence no longer haunted me, it became routine. I saw my daughter for the first time in months at a family gathering I almost didn't attend. She was cautious, her words measured, her hugs shorter than they used to be. But she didn't look at me with anger anymore, just disappointment, which somehow hurt worse. We spoke, but only about safe things, her job, the weather, small updates on life. My husband wasn't there, I didn't ask about him, and she didn't offer. One evening I drove past our old favorite restaurant, the one we used to go to every Friday night before life became too busy with responsibilities and routines. I saw him through the window, sitting at a table near the back, laughing at something. He looked different, lighter, happy. Across from him sat another woman. I didn't know who she was, and I didn't need to. She was someone new, someone who wasn't me. I had spent so long wondering if he would ever forgive me, if we could ever find our way back to each other. But standing there, watching from outside, I finally understood. He had already moved forward. He wasn't waiting anymore. For the first time, I realized that I had a choice. I could keep living in the wreckage of what I destroyed, or I could let it go. It wouldn't be easy. Regret clings to you in ways love never does. But maybe, just maybe, I could learn to live with it without letting it define me. I took one last look at him through the glass, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. This was the end of our story, but it didn't have to be the end of mine.
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.